I didn't think much about the trip until the tires left the pavement and the road narrowed into dirt and pine needles. Evan drove with one hand on the wheel, humming to a song I didn't recognize, his confidence effortless in the way only someone returning home can be. I watched the trees blur past and told myself this was just a weekend. Cold mornings, quiet woods, a chance to feel useful instead of restless. The cabin appeared the way places do when you're not sure they're real until you're standing in front of them. Weathered wood. A porch that creaked under our boots. Smoke already lifting from the chimney. Evan grinned and killed the engine. "Caleb's already here," he said, grabbing his duffel. He came up early to check the trails. I'd heard about Caleb in fragments. Older brother, practical, the one who stayed. Evan talked about him the way people talk about gravity, always present, rarely questioned. I followed Evan up the steps and felt the cold sharpen my breath. The door opened before we knocked. Caleb stood there in a thick flannel, sleeves rolled to his forearms, hair darker than Evan's and cut close. He didn't smile right away. His eyes moved from Evan to me, steady and assessing, like he was reading the space I occupied before deciding where to put me. "You made good time," he said to Evan. Then to me, "You must be the roommate." I nodded, suddenly aware of my posture, my hands, the way my name sounded when I said it. "Yeah. Thanks for having me." He stepped aside to let us in. The cabin smelled like wood smoke and coffee, warm and grounding. I crossed the threshold and felt something shift, as if I'd stepped into a different tempo. Caleb showed us where to put our things, where the extra blankets were, how to latch the door if the wind picked up at night. He spoke with a quiet economy, each sentence doing its job and no more. When he moved, it was with purpose. When he stopped, it was complete, like nothing else existed until he decided it did. We unpacked in the shared room. Evan took the top bunk without asking. I didn't mind. I was busy pretending not to notice Caleb's presence filling the doorway as he leaned there, arms crossed, watching us with an expression I couldn't place. "You hunt before?" he asked me. "Not really," I said. "I mean, once or twice. With my uncle." He nodded, accepting that without judgment. "We'll take it slow." We went outside to stack wood before dark. The air was sharp enough to sting. I worked beside Caleb, our rhythm unspoken. He split logs cleanly, the sound decisive. I gathered and stacked, feeling useful in a quieter way. Once, when I bent to lift a heavier piece, he reached out without a word and steadied it with his boot. Our hands brushed, just knuckles, just skin, but it startled me like a spark. I told myself it was the cold. As evening settled, we lit a fire. Evan talked. Caleb listened. I listened too, but my attention kept drifting, tracking the way Caleb leaned forward, elbows on knees, the way the firelight caught the edges of his face. When his gaze met mine across the flames, it held. Not long. Long enough. Later, while Evan washed dishes, Caleb and I stood on the porch. The forest pressed close, breathing. Somewhere, something moved through the underbrush, unbothered by us. "You okay with the early mornings?" he asked. "I think so. If you need anything," he said, then paused as if recalibrating. "Just say." I nodded. The words felt heavier than they should have. Inside, the cabin settled around us. The fire softened to embers. Evan went to bed first, already half asleep as he climbed the ladder. I lingered by the window, staring into the dark. Caleb stood beside me, close enough that I could feel his warmth through the space between us. He didn't crowd me. He didn't move away. "Tomorrow," he said quietly, "we'll head out before sunrise." "Okay." Silence stretched. It wasn't awkward. It was attentive, like something waiting. When I finally turned, our shoulders brushed. This time neither of us reacted. He looked at me, not searching, not curious, just present. I felt seen in a way that made my chest tighten. "Good night," he said. "Good night." I lay awake long after the cabin went still, listening to the wind and the distant crack of settling wood. My thoughts kept circling back to the porch, the fire, the way silence had felt less like emptiness and more like a promise. Somewhere in the dark, between what I knew and what I couldn't name yet, something had begun to take shape. The next morning started before I was ready for it. Evan's alarm went off in a soft chime that still felt violent in the dark. I swung my legs down the ladder, careful not to shake the frame, and landed in the cold with a quiet exhale. The cabin was blue with early light, the kind that makes everything feel unreal and provisional. Caleb was already up. He stood at the counter pouring coffee, movements unhurried, like the morning belonged to him. He glanced over his shoulder when he heard me and nodded once, acknowledging my existence without making a thing of it. I tried to mirror his calm and failed. My body felt too aware of itself, of the way the floor chilled my feet, of the stretch in my shoulders, of the fact that I was suddenly conscious of how I looked. "You sleep okay?" he asked. "Yeah," I said. "I think so." He handed me a mug. Our fingers met briefly. Again. This time I didn't tell myself it was the cold. I wrapped my hands around the ceramic and let the warmth steady me. We dressed in layers by the door, the routine practical and quiet. Evan hummed, half awake, tugging on his boots. Caleb helped me adjust the strap on my pack, his fingers precise and careful, never lingering longer than necessary, except that necessary seemed to take a second longer than it should have. Outside, the forest held its breath. The ground crunched softly under our boots. We walked in single file, Evan leading, Caleb behind him, me bringing up the rear. I watched the back of Caleb's jacket, the way his shoulders moved, easy and strong. I focused on the path. I tried not to imagine what it would feel like to walk beside him instead. We didn't see much. Tracks, a flash of movement too distant to matter. Mostly we waited. The waiting did something to time, stretched it thin. We stood close to share warmth, the space between us shrinking with each passing minute until it felt deliberate. At one point, Evan moved ahead to check something, leaving Caleb and me alone. The silence settled differently then. He leaned toward me slightly, enough that I could smell him. Soap and smoke and something clean I couldn't place. "Cold?" he murmured. "A little." He shifted closer without comment, just enough that our arms brushed. He didn't look at me. Neither did I. The contact was small, but it lit up every nerve like a map. When Evan returned, the moment folded back into itself, tucked away as if it hadn't happened. But it had. I carried it with me all the way back to the cabin. Later, while Evan napped, Caleb and I sorted gear by the table. He moved with the same quiet focus, handing me things without explanation, trusting me to know what to do. I liked that. I liked the way he watched me when he thought I wasn't paying attention. His gaze steady, thoughtful, stopping short of anything I could call obvious. "Sorry about the space," he said suddenly, nodding toward the bunks. "Cabin's small." "It's fine," I said too quickly. "I don't mind." He studied me for a moment as if deciding whether to say more. He didn't. Instead, he reached for a jacket hanging by the door and shrugged it on. The movement pulled the fabric tight across his shoulders. I looked away, embarrassed by the heat in my face. In the afternoon, the weather shifted. Wind pressed against the cabin, rattling the windows. Caleb suggested checking the traps before it got worse. Evan stayed behind, buried in his phone. The path was narrow, the brush close. At one point, Caleb reached back to steady me over a slick patch of ground. His hand wrapped around my wrist, firm, grounding. He didn't let go right away. When he did, it felt like something had been taken from me. "You okay?" he asked. "Yeah," I said, though my voice didn't sound convincing even to me. We finished quickly and headed back, the wind sharper now. By the time we reached the cabin, my fingers were numb. Inside, Caleb closed the door and turned on the heater. The sudden warmth made me dizzy. "Your hands?" he said, already moving. He took them gently, rubbing them between his palms. It was practical. Necessary. I told myself that over and over. Still, my breath caught. "Better?" he asked. "Yeah," I whispered. He didn't drop my hands immediately. His thumbs traced small, absent circles, like he was thinking about something else entirely. When he finally let go, the loss was immediate and profound. Evan looked up then, oblivious. "Everything good?" "All good," Caleb said, stepping back. That night, the wind kept us inside. We played cards, laughed more than I expected. Caleb smiled then, small, genuine. It did something to me I wasn't prepared for. When it was time for bed, the room felt different. Closer. Evan climbed up and fell asleep almost instantly. I lay there listening to the wind and the steady sound of Caleb's breathing from the other bunk. At some point, I felt him shift. The mattress creaked softly. A moment later, his voice came low and careful from the dark. "You awake?" "Yeah." Silence stretched between us, full and heavy. "Good," he said after a beat. "Just good." I stared up at the ceiling, heart racing, trying to understand what he hadn't said, and why it felt like it mattered more than anything else. The day carried a strange stillness, like the woods were holding on to something. Even Evan noticed it, joking about the quiet as we headed out again after breakfast. I nodded along, but my attention kept drifting, not to the trees or the tracks, but to the space Caleb occupied, and the way it seemed to bend around him. We split up near the ridge. Evan went ahead, eager and loud in his optimism. Caleb slowed, falling back until we were a few steps apart from Evan's noise. He didn't say anything at first. Neither did I. Our boots pressed into the frost-softened ground in careful rhythm. "You don't have to keep up," he said eventually, not looking at me. I'm fine. I know, he said, then corrected himself. I mean, you don't have to prove anything. The words landed heavier than they should have. I wasn't sure what he thought I was proving or to whom. I swallowed and nodded anyway. We reached a clearing where the trees opened just enough for pale light to spill through. Evan waved from farther up and disappeared over the rise. Caleb stopped. I did too, unsure why my heart was suddenly in my throat. He took off his gloves, tucked them into his pocket, and exhaled. When he finally looked at me, his expression wasn't guarded the way it usually was. It was careful. Like he was stepping onto thin ice. Can we sit? He asked. I nodded again. We lowered ourselves onto a fallen log, shoulders angled toward each other without quite touching. The quiet pressed in, not empty, listening. I don't talk much, he said, almost to the ground. Evan gets that from me. The talking instead. I smiled despite myself. I've noticed. He huffed a small laugh, then went still again. I stayed, he said after a moment. Here. When everyone else left. I waited. The waiting felt important. I thought it was the right thing, he continued. Someone had to take care of things. Of him too for a while. He paused. Sometimes I wonder if I just didn't know how to go. The admission caught me off guard. I hadn't expected anything like this quiet unraveling. My chest tightened, not with fear but recognition. It doesn't sound like running, I said softly. It sounds like choosing. He looked at me, then really looked like he was weighing the words in his hands. The silence stretched. A bird took off somewhere behind us, wings snapping the air. Yeah, he said finally. Maybe. The cold seeped through my jeans. Without thinking, I shifted closer. Our knees touched. Neither of us moved away. His hand rested on his thigh, fingers bare now, skin pink from the cold. I watched them before I could stop myself. When he noticed, his fingers curled slightly, not retreating, just acknowledging. I don't usually do this, he said quietly. Do what? Let people see me think. Something in my chest gave way at that. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The space between us had narrowed to something fragile and exact. We stayed like that longer than made sense. Long enough that the world seemed to slow around us, like it was giving us time we hadn't asked for. When Evan's voice finally echoed from the trees, distant and oblivious, the moment didn't break so much as suspend itself. We stood. Caleb brushed past me to grab his gloves, his arm grazing my side. This time I felt it all the way through. He hesitated just a fraction, then rested his hand briefly at the small of my back, guiding, gentle. The touch was over almost as soon as it began. I froze. He must have felt it, the way my breath caught, the way my body stilled. His hand lingered, not pressing, not pulling away. The world narrowed to that single point of contact, warm through layers, impossibly grounding. Sorry, he said, though his voice didn't sound like regret. It's okay, I said, and meant something I didn't yet understand. He removed his hand slowly, like he was testing whether I'd stop him. I didn't. I couldn't. We rejoined Evan without explanation. The rest of the day blurred. Movement without memory, sound without meaning. I kept replaying that moment, the weight of his hand, the care in it. It felt intentional in a way nothing else had before. That night the wind died down. The cabin felt smaller without it. Evan fell asleep mid-sentence, laughter still in his voice. I lay awake, staring into the dark, my thoughts circling. I felt the mattress shift. Caleb sat up, then stood. For a second I thought he was leaving the room. Instead he paused beside my bunk. You awake? He whispered. Yeah. He hesitated. I could feel it even without seeing him. Come on, he said softly. I don't want to wake him. I followed him into the main room, heart pounding. The fire had burned down to embers, casting a low, breathing light. We sat on opposite ends of the couch at first, space between us like a question. I didn't mean to earlier, he began, then stopped. He rubbed a hand over his face. I don't regret it. I just don't want to make things complicated for you. For me? I echoed. He looked up, eyes steady and unguarded. You matter. I don't want to pretend otherwise. The words froze me more completely than any touch could have. I couldn't speak. I barely breathed. We sat there, the quiet wrapping around us, not asking for answers yet. When his knee brushed mine, neither of us moved. And in that stillness, with the fire breathing low and the night holding its breath, I knew something had shifted beyond denial, into something that would not let me go back. We stayed on the couch longer than the fire had any right to last. The embers pulsed softly, red and low, like they were breathing with us. Neither of us spoke at first. The quiet wasn't heavy anymore, it was careful. Attentive. I could feel Caleb's presence the way you feel weather coming in, subtle but undeniable. I was the one who shifted first. Not away, closer. Just enough that my shoulder brushed his arm. The contact sent a clean, electric awareness through me, sharper than fear, warmer than certainty. He inhaled slowly beside me like he was bracing himself. "You don't have to say anything," he said, voice low. "I just needed you to know I wasn't imagining it. Whatever this is." I swallowed. My throat felt tight, like the words had lined up too quickly and were now fighting for space. "I've been trying not to," I admitted. "Imagine it, I mean." He turned toward me then. Fully. His knee angled toward mine, his body open in a way I hadn't seen before. The firelight caught his face, softened the lines I'd come to associate with restraint. "And?" he asked gently. "And I'm bad at lying to myself," I said, a quiet laugh breaking through the nerves. "Especially when someone keeps looking at me like they see more than I've figured out yet." Something in his expression shifted at that. Surprise, maybe? Or relief. He leaned back slightly, running a hand through his hair, buying himself a second. "I don't want to rush you," he said. "I don't even know what rushing would look like here. He stopped, exhaled. "I care. More than makes sense for a weekend." My heart thudded. The truth of it landed between us, solid and fragile all at once. "I keep thinking about Evan," I said, hating how small my voice sounded. "About how this could get messy." Caleb nodded. "I've thought about that too. A lot." He paused. "He'd be okay. Eventually. He just wants us to be honest. Even when we're bad at it." I studied him, the way he held himself. Steady even now, even with something clearly at stake. "You're not bad at honesty," I said. "You're just careful." He smiled at that. Not the small one from earlier, but something warmer. "Real. Careful's kept me safe," he said. "But it's also kept me alone." The admission settled over us, intimate in its quiet. Without thinking, I reached out and rested my hand on the couch between us, palm open. An offering, not a demand. He looked at it for a long moment before placing his hand over mine. His touch was warm, grounding. His thumb brushed once across my knuckles. Slow, deliberate. The world narrowed again the way it had earlier in the woods, but deeper now. Closer. I felt like if I moved too fast, I'd break something delicate and rare. "What if I said yes?" I asked, barely above a whisper. "To whatever this is." He met my gaze, eyes steady but bright with something unguarded. "Then I'd take it seriously," he said. "And slow. And I'd probably be terrified." I smiled, nerves buzzing. "Good. Me too." The space between us felt suddenly intentional, like a line drawn only so it could be crossed. Caleb lifted his hand from mine, hesitating just a second, then reached up and brushed his fingers against my cheek. The touch was feather-light, asking rather than assuming. I didn't pull away. He leaned in, stopping just short, close enough that I could feel his breath. He waited. The choice sat entirely with me, heavy and sacred. I closed the distance. The kiss was soft, uncertain in the best way. It wasn't rushed or hungry, it was careful, like we were learning the shape of something new together. His lips were warm, steady, fitting against mine like they'd been waiting. When we pulled back, we stayed close, foreheads nearly touching. I could hear my own heartbeat, loud and unsteady. "Okay," he breathed, a smile in his voice. "Yeah." We didn't kiss again right away. Instead, we sat there, shoulders touching, hands loosely entwined like it was the most natural thing in the world. The fire crackled softly, then settled. "I don't know what this looks like tomorrow," I said. "Me neither," he replied. "But I know I don't want to pretend tonight didn't happen." I nodded. "Me neither." Eventually the fire faded to ash. Caleb stood first, offering his hand. I took it without hesitation. We paused in the doorway to the room, listening to Evan's steady breathing. Caleb leaned in, voice barely a whisper. "We'll take it one step at a time." I squeezed his hand once. "Yeah." As I climbed into my bunk, heart still racing, I realized something had shifted, not loudly, not dramatically, but permanently. I'd asked the question. And for the first time, I hadn't been afraid of the answer. Morning didn't rush us. I woke to a quiet that felt earned, like the world had decided to give us time. Pale light slid through the cabin windows, dust motes drifting lazily in its path. For a moment, I forgot where I was, forgot the woods, the trip, the weight of everything that had shifted the night before. Then I remembered. I lay still, listening. Evan's steady breathing came from the top bunk. From the other side of the room, I heard Caleb move, soft footsteps, the creak of a floorboard he probably knew by heart. My chest tightened, not with fear but with something gentler. Anticipation maybe. Or the careful hope of someone waking into a new version of their life. I climbed down quietly and joined him in the kitchen. He stood at the counter, sleeves pushed up, hair still rumpled from sleep. When he looked over and saw me, his expression softened instantly, like he hadn't realized he'd been holding something in. "Hey," he said. "Hey." It was such a small word. It carried more than it should have. Coffee brewed between us, the familiar ritual grounding. We moved around each other easily, careful but not distant. When I reached for a mug, his hand brushed mine, not accidental this time. He didn't pull away. Neither did I. We took our coffee to the porch. The air was crisp, the forest washed clean by the night. I wrapped my hands around the mug and breathed in deeply. Caleb leaned against the railing beside me, close enough that our shoulders touched. It felt natural. "I didn't sleep much," I admitted. He smiled, eyes on the trees. "Me neither." We shared a quiet laugh, the kind that doesn't need explanation. For a while we just stood there, sipping coffee, listening to the world wake up. A bird called somewhere in the distance. The moment felt suspended, delicate but steady. Eventually, Evan stumbled out, yawning loudly, breaking the spell without meaning to. "You two are up early," he said. "Traitors." Caleb shot me a look, quick, unreadable to anyone else but warm. "Couldn't sleep," he said easily. "Same," I added. Evan shrugged and went back inside, already absorbed in his phone. The normalcy of it all felt surreal. I realized I'd been bracing for something, questions, tension, guilt, but none of it came. Just the quiet continuation of a morning. Later we went out again, the three of us. The woods felt different now. Not because anything had changed out there, but because I had. I noticed the way Caleb walked slightly closer to me than before, how his hand would hover near my back when the trail narrowed. Small, protective gestures. Not hidden, not announced. When Evan lagged behind to take a call, Caleb slowed too. We walked side by side, boots crunching in sync. "You okay?" he asked quietly. I nodded. "Yeah. Just thinking." "Me too," he said. "But the good kind." I smiled at that. "There's a good kind?" He bumped my shoulder lightly. "I think we're figuring it out." We stopped near a stream, sunlight catching on the water. Evan wandered ahead again, absorbed in his own world. Caleb crouched to rinse his hands, then looked up at me. "We don't have to define anything right now," he said. "I don't want this to feel like pressure." "It doesn't," I said honestly. "It feels like room to breathe." He held my gaze, eyes steady. "Good." Back at the cabin, the afternoon unfolded slowly. We cooked together, Caleb and I trading quiet jokes, Evan chiming in now and then. At one point, Caleb leaned close to murmur something sarcastic under his breath, and I laughed harder than I should have. He grinned like he was proud of that. Later, Evan went to lie down, leaving us in the living room again. This time we sat closer without thinking about it. Our knees touched. Stayed touching. "So," I said, breaking the comfortable silence. "Where do we go from here?" Caleb considered that. "I don't know," he said. "But I know I want to keep choosing this. Whatever pace we need." I nodded. "Me too." He reached for my hand, fingers threading through mine with an ease that made my chest ache. We sat there like that, watching the fire, saying nothing else. There was no urgency anymore, just presence. When night came again, it didn't feel heavy or charged. It felt calm. Safe. As we got ready for bed, Caleb caught my eye across the room and smiled, soft, private. Lying there in the dark, I realized something important had shifted. We weren't standing on the edge anymore. We were already walking forward, together, quietly, one honest step at a time. I woke before anyone else. It wasn't the kind of waking that comes from noise or cold, but the gentle awareness of being fully present. For a moment I stayed still, listening to the cabin breathe, the faint hum of the heater, the soft creak of wood settling, the distant hush of wind through trees. And then there was Caleb. Not touching me, not even in the same bed, but close enough that I could feel him in the room the way you feel the sun before you open your eyes. That quiet certainty settled in my chest, warm and unfamiliar. I climbed down slowly, careful not to wake Evan, and padded into the main room. Dawn was just beginning to press against the windows, pale and tentative. I poured myself a cup of coffee and stood there, hands wrapped around it, letting the warmth seep in. I heard footsteps behind me. "Couldn't sleep either?" Caleb asked softly. I turned. He looked different in the early light, less guarded somehow, like the day hadn't yet reminded him who he usually was supposed to be. His hair stuck up slightly, his flannel unbuttoned at the collar. "Not really," I said. but not in a bad way. He nodded, understanding exactly what I meant. He poured himself coffee and joined me by the window. For a while we just stood there shoulder to shoulder watching the forest wake up. The sky shifted colors slowly, deliberately, like it didn't want to rush us. Everything feels quieter, I said. Caleb smiled. Yeah, I like it. He reached out then, not hesitating this time, and laced his fingers through mine. The gesture was simple, unguarded. My heart skipped anyway. We didn't talk about what we were or what this meant beyond the weekend. We didn't need to. The silence felt full, not empty. Like something solid had been placed between us and didn't need explaining. Evan eventually emerged, loud and hungry, breaking the moment with his usual energy. We pulled our hands apart easily without panic. It didn't feel like hiding. It felt like choosing the right moment. The rest of the morning passed in easy rhythms, packing gear, cleaning up, moving around each other without thinking too much. Caleb brushed past me once in the narrow hallway, his hand resting briefly at my waist. It was subtle. It was everything. When it came time to leave, I felt an unexpected ache in my chest. The cabin already felt like a before. Something we wouldn't quite be able to return to in the same way. Evan loaded the truck, humming to himself. Caleb and I stood on the porch watching him. Guess this is it, I said. For now, Caleb replied. I don't think this is the kind of thing that just ends. I looked at him, really looked at him, the steadiness, the quiet warmth, the way he didn't overpromise. Me neither. He hesitated, then reached out and squeezed my hand once. Not hidden. Not dramatic. Just real. The drive back felt different. Evan talked about plans, about work, about nothing important. I watched the road unwind ahead of us and thought about how strange it was, that everything looked the same but I felt fundamentally altered. When we finally pulled into town, the normal world rushed back in. Buildings, noise, movement. Evan parked and hopped out, already distracted by his phone. Caleb lingered by the truck with me. So, he said, hands in his pockets. Coffee sometime? I smiled. Yeah, I'd like that. He nodded, like he'd expected the answer but was still relieved to hear it. Then quietly, text me when you get home. Just so I know you're okay. I will. We stood there for a second longer than necessary. He leaned in, pressing his forehead briefly to mine, a soft, grounding touch that felt like a promise without words. Then he stepped back. I watched him go, heart full in a way that felt calm instead of overwhelming. Later that night, alone in my apartment, I replayed the weekend in fragments. The woods, the firelight, the weight of his hand at my back, the way silence had learned to speak. I realized something then, something simple and terrifying and true. Nothing about this had been loud. There were no grand declarations, no dramatic turning point. Just a series of quiet choices, made honestly, that had shifted the direction of my life. As I set my phone down after sending him a goodnight text, a small smile tugged at my lips. Something real had begun. And for the first time, I wasn't wondering where it would lead, I was just ready to walk there.